here's what I'm going to recommend for many people with this traditional marriage who have the possibility of paying estate tax, or even if you don't. I think you can't tell what's going to happen in the future. We just don't know. In 29 years, I've done a lot of projections. Every single one of them has been wrong. The people had more money than we thought. They had less money than they thought. I was wrong about what happened with the federal estate tax. The wrong person died first. We always thought it was going to be he that died first. We were wrong. She died first. So we just don't know what's going to happen. So here's what I'm going to suggest. What if, instead of making the B trust the primary beneficiary, because that's what happens with most traditional plans, the first $2 million or the first exemption amount goes into the B trust. Instead of making the B trust the primary beneficiary, we make the surviving spouse the primary beneficiary, because that's what the client wants anyway. That gives the surviving spouse the entire control of all the marital assets. But you say, well, gee, Jim, what about that estate tax? What about the good use of that B trust? I still am going to include the B trust in my estate planning. But the difference is, instead of the B trust being the primary beneficiary, I'm going to have the B trust be the secondary beneficiary. And I'm going to allow the surviving spouse the option. If they want it, they keep it all, end of story. If they say, I don't want or I don't need all the money, and they file the appropriate, and the legal word for it is disclaimer, which is basically, I don't want it, what happens to the money is it goes next in line, who's ever listed next. I'm recommending that for a lot of people, what happens next is the B trust. Okay? Then, if the surviving spouse is in a strong enough position that based on her own assets and based on the income of the B trust, that's going to be more than enough money for her or him, then we can utilize this B trust and get the estate tax savings that you could with the traditional plan. But let's say the assets go down. You know, I have very conservative clients, and I think particularly as people get older, they get conservative, and you know, they say, oh, what happens if the market goes way down? What happens if I get sick? In the meantime, they're sitting on $5 million, you know, afraid of running out of money. What if I get sick? What if the last illness is very expensive? What if you're right? What if all this stuff happens? And we use this traditional model. Now we have underprovided for the surviving spouse, which is exactly what we don't want to do. If we say surviving spouse is the primary beneficiary, if the surviving spouse doesn't want or need all the money, then it could go to the B trust. Let me throw out another possibility. Surviving spouse says, you know, I don't even want the income from the B trust. And beside, I like the idea of the kids getting this long stretch or inherited IRA. So for $100,000 for each kid, I don't even want the income from that money. Well, now we have the same thing as if you had named each child for $100,000, but in effect, you're letting the surviving spouse make that decision. And the reason why I want the surviving spouse to make that decision is because he or she will know a lot more than you know now. They'll know how much money is around. They'll know what the federal estate tax law is like. They will know how much money their need is. And they have 9 months after the date of death in order to make that decision. So it's not like they have to come running in while the body's still warm and say, okay, I disclaim, I disclaim. They have 9 months. In fact, I actually tell people, back off for a minute, you know, spend some time grieving before you make an important decision. And frankly, I typically will try to help them with the decision. And if anything, I'm going to err on over-providing for the surviving spouse. But what we end up with usually is we end up with a tax-efficient plan that is providing or over-providing for the surviving spouse, and then we could also make the appropriate decisions at that time whether you're better off leaving it to children or a well-drafted trust for the beneficiaries for the grandchildren. So to me, this flexible estate plan is much more powerful than the traditional plan.